Welcome back to the Discipler Group. I'm glad that you've come to be with us again today. We have an exciting day planned for us, but before we get into the day, I want to talk a little bit about some of the exciting things I'm hearing from pastors throughout the Baltimore-Washington Conference. Most recently, I heard from one of our pastors who had 11 new members join the church. Now, this is a church that's worshiping about 65 people, and the average age is over 65. And she told me that 8 of the 11 people were all under 35 years of age. I praise God for that. I talked to another pastor, has introduced a new worship band into the congregation. They're using Starbucks coffee at the coffee time, and about the excitement and new energy that's being generated, the people from the community that are coming to check out the church. And again, we're just seeing some vibrant and exciting things happening. These pastors are talking about how our discipler groups are helping them to think through, work through, have new learnings, mutually share with one another, and how they're being enriched from that. And so I want to thank all of you for the way that you continue to work together and the way that you continue to learn together and resource each other. God is truly blessing us. Today, we're going to continue to talk about worship, and we have 2 presenters that will be sharing with us. Both are coming from a resource called Worship Connection. The first one is Reverend Rudy Rasmus. Rudy is the pastor of St. John's Church in downtown Houston, Texas. This is an innovative church that got started, well, really, they thought about closing the church. And Rudy Rasmus was called by the bishop and by God to go to this congregation and to serve. He started working with this church and reaching out to the homeless in the community. And so the base of this congregation became homeless people and those who cared about homeless and worked with the homeless. Today, they have more than 1,000 people in worship. Their worship is exciting and powerful. And when they worship, well, the Spirit of God is felt by everyone. Rudy talks about worship needs to bring us to the feet of Jesus. Let's listen to Rudy.
See, for most folk, worship is only done at church. You know that, right? So for those folk who think worship can only be done at church, if we don't get them to church first, then we have missed a lot of folk. In Houston, Texas, where I live and do ministry, the stats show that there are more than 500,000 people at home on Sunday morning. And really, the last time I checked, the religious writer in the Houston Chronicle said there are probably 1 million people at the house, chilling on Sunday morning, taking it easy. But what are we doing to get folk to church who think we are really a wacky group of people, who think we really don't have anything to share with them? And I want you to know, I know what you are going through. I also know how exhausted you probably are right now, wondering from one week to the next, what's the use? Or are they getting it? Or why are they so mean? Come on, you can say it, show you right. Yeah. They're mean because we have yet to get them to the feet of Jesus. My dad passed on the 4th of July this year. And my dad raised me to not trust preachers and church folk. But my dad didn't believe. I ended up not believing. And then when I ended up in ministry, he told his friends he had lost me to God. You know, we were in a tough business. And he had raised me to be in a tough business. He didn't raise me to be a preacher boy. And for 3 years, he kind of stopped talking to me about important things. About the third year, he began to show up at our 8 o'clock service and kept showing up at our 8 o'clock service. And 6 years ago, at 70 years old, one Sunday, the invitation was extended, and my dad walked down the aisle. When the doctors told him 5 weeks before he died that he was going to die quickly, he had peace like I could not imagine. Because he told me, now I understand. Jesus had to go through Samaria because there was a woman there at the well that needed what Jesus had.
I give thanks to God for Rudy Rasmus and his ministry and the way that he's reaching new people. Dr. Craig Miller from the General Board of Discipleship also wants us to reach new people, new believers in the community. One of the things that he shares with us is about starting new worship services as a way to reach new people in the community, reach people that have not been connected with the church before. I know many of you have been asking about that. How is it that we can start a new worship service? Where do we start a new worship service? What are the things we ought to be thinking about? Well, we're grateful for the ministry of the General Board of Discipleship and of Dr. Craig Miller and how he'll help us to think more about starting new worship services. I invite you to listen to Craig now.
Just a couple tips on starting a new worship service. And as I say, there's a whole tip sheet in here that goes in much more detail, but approach it like you're starting a new church. Do the demographics. Who are the people you're trying to reach? What are the resources that you're going to need? A good rule of thumb is the same resources you now have for your existing worship service, you need to supply for a new worship service. If you pay a musician for your current worship service, you're probably going to have to pay a musician for the other worship service. You see what I'm saying? So look at the resources. Start as a faith community, linking worship to the discipleship system. In an existing church, one of the ways you look at this is developing a core group first and developing small groups that will eventually move to be part of that worship experience. So look at the discipleship system. The music and the right musician is key. In our culture, music is what brings people together. But the other thing that's interesting is for the younger generation, what we're finding is what they really enjoy is a more of an eclectic style of music. There's a church in Nashville called Bellevue Community Church, a non-denominational church that is a rapidly growing church. And what they do with their music is very interesting, is every weekend they have a different music setup. So one week you may have a jazz band leading the singing. The next week you may have a country band leading the service. The next week you may have a cello and a violin and an acoustic guitar leading the worship service. You see what I'm saying? There's a different feel of music every week, so it feels different. And you can do that if you use organ and a piano as your basic music instrumentation. If you supplement that on a regular basis, one week maybe you have a violin, or the next week maybe you have a harp. You see what I'm saying? You supplement your basic music instrumentation with other instruments, it gives it a different feel. It feels like something new or creative is happening in this worship experience. And then aim for over 120 in worship. If you're looking for a celebrative worship, think about how many you want to show up the first time, because that's going to set the bar of how many is going to be attending that current worship service. Now, if you are in this room and with this topic of starting a new worship service, I applaud you and I encourage you. Because just think of the people who will come to the worship service. Not the worship service itself, but who could you reach who you're not currently reaching if you renew your current worship life or you start a new worship service that really thinks about those who are disconnected to the life of God. So I pray for you that God will give you new vision and energy and excitement and give you the way that will most effectively reach people in your community so they can know the deep love of Jesus Christ.